I believe it was in this JFK speech. Maybe not. I seem to recall this JFK speech from American University in 1963. A lot of people have been bringing a lot of attention to that speech that JFK made, his famous peace speech, which I didn't. I know I had probably heard of it when I was studying, when I was getting my history degree, my useless history degree in college. I think it was mentioned in one of the classes I took. It was actually a very good modern history class with a very good history professor. He was an older guy who came out of retirement. He was fantastic. I forget his name, but the people have been raising the. Well, I guess if you're the CIA, you would be saying that people are raising the specter of that speech lately, because RFK Jr. has been mentioning it. I'm not much for caring for the system at all, but RFK looks good. I doubt he's going to get me excited enough to go vote, but if he won, that'd be nice. Uh, Call me cynical, but I think I've said it before. I think this country, the United States, the problems are deep seated and cultural in nature, and have to do with general ignorance, to put it nicely, of the population at large into how their own system of government works and how money works. And if you got citizens that are basically this dumb, I don't know how anything good can come out of it. But if RFK can turn it around, who am I to stop him? So there's my RFK spiel. I wanted to talk about this. I bring up this speech because there's a quote related that people relate to this speech, or maybe it's just related to the general idea of the speech. It relates to the realism school of geopolitics and understanding the world geopolitically from a realist perspective. And the quote is, let me take a couple puffs off my pipe. I just actually put a hotkey on this. No, I'm not going to leave you hanging, though. The quote is, "See the world as it is, not as you want it or would like it to be." Now, I talk about propaganda a lot. Believe it or not, my dad was a trained psyops person. I don't know much about what he did, but they exist in the military, in the special forces, in this sort of army within an army that existed and still exists. And I don't know much about it. A lot of what he did was, tactical type of psyops stuff, small level stuff. Nothing worldwide or national, but still the same concept. So I talk about propaganda a lot, but I don't, make no mistake, I have been falling for propaganda just as bad as the rest of them in a lot of cases. I was always aware that a lot of what we hear, I was always aware, at least on a peripheral level, all the way back to childhood, that, some of what we're told is lies. Just from my personal experiences and from just a rather uninterested and distant observation of my dad's career from the perspective of a child. And it wasn't until later that I really started connecting the dots. But I've fallen for the propaganda nonetheless. And one piece of propaganda that I fell for, lock, stock, and barrel, recently, even during COVID, and I fell for literally almost none of the COVID propaganda from the beginning. And the receipts are online. And it was a stressful time for me because I just would not go along with the BS. I just would not. And it was stressful because people were turning into Gestapo in this country, in the United States. We had totalitarianism sort of germinating from a seedling that existed within the fears of each and every human being in this society that is culturally stagnant, spiritually dead, as Nietzsche would have said. God is dead, and that's not a good thing. But I did fall for this propaganda about the Chinese lockdowns. Now, recently I've been branching out. I've always been a fan of China and Chinese history and Chinese culture. Big fan. I have to go there someday. Big fan. I think China is fantastic, and I just love the culture and the history. And I've talked about it many times, and it's very influential on how I think about the world. But I fell for this notion without really seeking to confirm what I was being told by the media, by all corners of the media, even the alternative media. I fell for this notion that China imposed these brutal, ubiquitous, and downright Orwellian lockdowns on the entire population, and they were welding people into their homes, and I'm sure some national endowment, now looking back, some national endowment for democracy people were running around, and who knows, they could have been staging that shit. I don't know. It's possible people did get welded into their houses. You see, the Chinese do things a little differently. They have a different culture. They have a different outlook culturally, informed by thousands of years of history, a proud history, and they're going to do things their way. And Europeans, it's really quite bigoted for Europeans to sit there and wag their fingers at them, first of all. For all of this, inclusion bullshit, inclusion only seems to matter when it's convenient for certain people who generally have a lot of money. But then, recently I started branching out into different sectors of just on YouTube, and starting to get contradictory testimonials of this idea that China was, had these massive zero COVID. They had a zero COVID policy, but that has nothing to do with, what the provincial governments did in China. And this all goes back, the reason people fall for this stuff, lock, stock, and barrel, is because they don't understand China, because they don't understand the history, even the recent history. I mean, pretty much everything every American believes, if they believe what they're being told in the media about China, is disingenuous at best, outright lies at worst. From Tiananmen Square, which was, I wasn't there, but I have questions about what we were told. And, we never hear, concrete death figures. I haven't seen any video or even convincing pictures of entire, crowds of civilians being mowed down and run over by tanks. Show me the pictures. So whatever happened there. I heard of this guy who was his dad or uncle was a reporter and was just happened to be for the United States and just happened to be there at the time. Some guy on Twitter. So his dad just happened to be there at the time, and I called him out and I said, you've been around spooks before. We know that, right? And he didn't deny it. And I'm wondering, what happened there? Why they're, But even this reporter or spook posing as a reporter, wasn't able to capture anything very convincing as far as convincing me that Tiananmen Square was a massacre of innocent civilians. I saw lots of pictures of Chinese soldiers that were killed by the crowd. But people believe these things because they don't understand China and they don't understand history. But I'll tell you, there is China, and the Chinese government actually is very conscious of history, and it informs everything from their position on civil unrest, which is not a absolutist position. The Chinese government allows civil unrest all the time. Also, people don't understand that the Chinese nation as a whole, as a political unit, is extremely decentralized, especially compared to the United States. It's more of a federalist system in a lot of ways than the United States is at this point. Am I yelling? Well, that's because I'm fucking pissed that we've allowed our federalist system to digress to a point where it's not even as federalist. States or local administrative polities are not as sovereign as those of China. Am I making sense? Who knows? Who cares? But then now here's where I want to get into the meat and potatoes of this. To illustrate that last point though, I found two figures that are pretty convincing here, just from a high level. Government spending to GDP percentage in the United States averaged 25.66%. That's a big, I didn't realize that was such a big, reaching an all-time high of 46.66% of GDP in 2020. So our government spending is half of our gross domestic product. So that's massive. So that indicates a much larger central government. Let's see if that includes state government. Is that federal government? Government spending to GDP. Let me pause it. Okay, unpause. So here we have a very good illustration of U.S. Government spending to GDP. Here we have federal outlays. Now this is from the Federal Reserve, whatever the ED stands for, Fred, official site. Latest figure, 24% federal outlays, federal payments, direct federal spending is 24% of GDP. Now, just to briefly show this, in 2021, Chinese government spending as a percent of GDP was 15.92%. Now, just for brevity, I'm just going to assume that's the central government of China, because if it's the provincial government of China and federal government, if it's all government spending, that's tiny compared to the United States. But if that's just the Beijing central government, that is 10% less than the United States. So the Chinese government, as a percentage of GDP, so it's not nominal. So what we're saying is that as a percentage of the Chinese GDP, they spend 10% less than the United States federal government spends as juxtaposed to its GDP. Okay, that means that in essence, the Chinese government the central government is much smaller, much less powerful, because it's throwing less money out there. It has much less influence on the country as a whole. And if we go back to this Wikipedia article, now this is a rare case where I would use a Wikipedia article. I had to look at it first. Now, we know Wikipedia has been stepped all over by public relations firms, and through the public relations firms, governments around the world can do basically whatever they want legally to Wikipedia. Wikipedia has been demolished. It's not good as a source for anything that is remotely controversial. Thank God the libs, who in large part are behind, screwing with this, whether they are in PR firms or working directly for governments or in the political class or whatever. The libs that are really behind all this, they have no respect for history whatsoever. So they've left a lot of history articles in pretty good shape. But anything current, anything remotely controversial, Wikipedia is not a good source. But if Wikipedia, in this case, given that it is so heavily influenced by Western governments, especially through PR firms, if Wikipedia itself will give us a figure such as this, that total percentage of the population of China affected by lockdowns at any time is 101,602,895. Now, let's do a little math, people. China's population is, I think, 1.4 or more. 1.4 billion. 101 million, according to Wikipedia, which Jeffrey Wales is basically CIA at this point, and he's doing Bohemian Grove and whatever Bilderberg Group, and he's doing he's really deep into that nonsense. And the other co-founder had to leave because he was disgusted by how the platform was, in what direction the platform was moving. He's all over the internet. He talks about how the platform got corrupted way back in the 90s. But if Wikipedia, which is totally manipulated by the CIA and MI6 and all the public relations firms and the WEF and the WHO and all them, if they're saying that only 101 million people in China were affected by lockdowns, that's less than 10% of the population of China. Okay? Let's get our math together, folks. Now, what percentage of people in many European countries fell under lockdowns in 2020 and 20? And this is from this, by the way. Look at just to be sure. These figures cover up to 2022. Now, lockdowns in China, the zero COVID policy of China effectively ended in December of 2022. And China only had, throughout the entire time, according to Wikipedia, 101 million people affected under restrictions. So, if we compare that to almost any European country, that's going to be significantly less people affected by lockdowns that were under restrictions. Okay? Now, as you notice, these were all done on a city level, prefectural level. So the prefecture is like a province. Like, I think Hunan is a prefecture. Okay, and then you have sub-prefects. So they have various administrative divisions. This is what people don't understand about China. Most of the actual governance occurs at these levels. The prefectural, I don't know if provincial is a level above that, but they have several different administrative divisions. This goes back to Chinese history. This is where history becomes important to understand. China has always, throughout its history, developed very complex bureaucracies going way back to the ancient times. They have a very long tradition of administrative states that, as I've talked about before, have this cycle of, centralizing and then decentralizing. So we have that. So this is in keeping with the Chinese tradition that most of the governance occurs at the local level, not at the national level. And this is, if you know anything about Chinese history recently, you would know that, the whole, in the most crucial political struggle in China has always been centralized national government versus decentralized local governments. And we've seen it ebb and flow from the high degree from at times being much more highly centralized to now being kind of balanced with a lot of local autonomy. Why is that? Well, now this is what other people need to understand about China is it's not a monolithic ethno-state of Han Chinese. It's actually very culturally and linguistically and religiously diverse. People say religion is suppressed. It was a lot more suppressed during Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong was an asshole, as far as I can tell. I mean, whatever. You can't judge. So because a leader is mean doesn't necessarily mean they're bad. Let's just put it that way. So already, we're dispelling a myth. Now I started hearing through various people different figures as far as the total number of people locked down in China. I've heard 200 million, 300 million. Either way, even 300 million would be 15-20%. I would, in fact, 15%, just off the top of my head. I didn't sleep well last night. After all the Ukraine shit kept me awake half the night. It's too exciting. I couldn't even sleep. I guess that's kind of sick, isn't it? After just watching the coup of Prigozhin, just amazing. But anyway, moving on. Even 300 million. I've heard the figure that 300 million people in China were affected by any sort of COVID restriction at all. Another thing people don't understand is, yes, China has a lot of large cities, but, a large city in China means like 5 to 10 million people, not like 1 million or 500,000 as in the United States or Europe. You would say a large city would be maybe like 500,000 to a million. China, they don't get to be called a large city until they're like almost 10 million, 5 million people, maybe closer to 10 million people. So many large cities were locked down. That's where really you saw the bulk of the zero COVID policy and the very well captured videos and images from around China of lockdowns and these mass testing and the guys in the white suits. We call them bunny suits in the healthcare field. So we saw these well captured images, but it turns out that, as far as I can tell, much less of the population was actually subjected to restrictions in China than in Europe or maybe even the United States. I mean, in the United States, we had national, I believe, level lockdowns, minus maybe South Dakota or a couple other states. But the vast majority of the population was under the 15 days to slow the spread, which I think turned to 30 days to slow the spread. Here in Florida, they closed the fucking beach here for 2 months or a month and a half, something like that. I was pissed. And of course, there was one sellout cop out there who would go around and fuck with people on the beach. But people started making scarecrows and fooling the police to go up and approach scarecrows. They made mad overnight. People would sneak on the beach and make scarecrows and stuff and fool the cops. They'd put a fishing pole there. There was always enough cops to sold out to enforce these stupid rules. Which, there's cops and then there's sellout cops, and it's hard to tell the difference between the two. So for that 1% of cops that aren't sellouts, I apologize in advance, but 99% are sellouts. So that's just a little thing, Now here's what's funny. I want to check that. Let's look at this. Here goes. Look at this Google search, by the way. Chinese lockdowns not as bad as Europe. Let me see if I can. I'm gonna get a vape here. So, China's COVID success compared to Europe shows blah 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 on CNN. But look what I tried to search for: Chinese lockdowns not so bad as Europe. I mean, pretty straightforward, right? You would think I would get an article somewhere on one of these search results that would, state the obvious, which is that China's lockdowns did not affect as much of the population of China as many European lockdowns, United States lockdowns, some South American lockdowns did. I'm sure masks were strictly enforced in a lot of places too, but I'd like to see more about how many places had mask restrictions. Now, masks were already pretty, common before because of previous pandemics in China, such as the not MERS. They had SARS-CoV-1 or SARS back in the day. They had a couple other bird flu, stuff like that. So masks have been around for a lot longer. So I would think, mask wearing is much more common and will remain more common after, this is a distant memory, which some people want it right now. The people who got into all of this nonsense, lock, stock, and barrel, don't want to talk about it anymore. The vaccine, Gestapo assholes, the lockdown assholes, the people who would yell at you in the stores for not wearing a mask, they're all trying to hide right now, those assholes. Never forget who those people were. But look at this Google search. Like, there's not one on this first page. I searched for what I thought should be pretty clear, cut, and dry. I mean, maybe I should spell check this, and it'll help. Let me see if I could spell check this. Is there a way to... It won't let me spell check it. Okay. Oh, spell check. Okay, they did some weird shit here. English. I don't know. It's not letting me spell check this. But anyways, it's all spelled right except for this. I mean, Google has pretty good AI, right? And algorithms, and they've been around for a long time. They're the biggest tech company in the world. They should be able to create a search engine that could discern what I'm looking for here. This infuriates me. I mean, because to think some West Coast lib dweeb is in some office somewhere putting together this nonsense algorithm, disrespecting all of us. So I'd like to see proof that more people were put on lockdowns in China than the United States. That I can say on top of that, given this, that and understanding Chinese and their history and their culture, much fewer businesses were closed and ultimately put out of business in China, local businesses, than in the United States. And goddamn, Foxconn kept running. The whole protest movement in China recently, last year, that they made a big deal about, that was really started over an American company or American linked company, Foxconn, which makes the iPhones, mistreating their workers and making them work, even though the people were, because a lot of them fell for propaganda themselves. They were afraid of the pandemic, and they felt the company was putting their lives in danger. And this American-linked company said, no, you guys are going to come to work. We're going to make you sleep in the factory. And there was a big protest. That's where all this started. Just for the record, people. Okay, so listen, all of this China nonsense, I'm already done fighting against the Russian nonsense. I think people are starting to get that the Russian situation is very nuanced. Ukraine, all of this is complicated, and civilians are starting to learn to shut their mouths if their only, source of understanding is from fucking television shows. I'm already starting to see civilians stop, especially boomers, are keeping their mouths shut. They understand finally that, a lot of what they believe is garbage, and they're shutting up, and that's good because they need to shut up first and foremost. But, everybody, so with Russia, people are starting to understand this is a very complicated, touchy situation. Now let's go to China. Let's stop this nonsense about China. Show me how China's COVID policies were more severe than the United States. These people are lying to us left and right. Google is complete Orwellian shit. Okay, and It's getting out of control with these people. They're disrespecting me. I want one of these tech dweebs. I want to meet one of these tech dweebs that are behind this sort of shit. I'd love to meet one of them. Okay? I don't care if they're CIA or not. I still want to meet them because the CIA are a bunch of clowns too. Anyway, I'm losing my fucking mind here because this triggers me. This triggers me. I put a very simple fucking search that should be that the groundbreaking AI algorithm search engine should be able to figure out and give me a search, give me information I'm actually looking for. You're fucking useless, Google. Fuck California. Fuck all of you in California. This is why I hate California. This sort of nonsense is coming out of California. Fuck all you people. I'm out.